Whenever I visit my local game store, I always walk past a part of the store that intrigues me. It's the historical gaming section, and it's not for the game itself, although the game might be great, it's for the miniatures. The models used in these games are ludicrously tiny. And when I say ludicrous, I mean they're the size or smaller of a Primaris Space Marine's leg. For a while now, I've wanted to paint a very small mini to explore the unique challenges of painting at that scale. Instead of painting a subject matter that I'm not entirely interested in, however, I browse the vast corridors of the internet to find a genre that I'm more keen about. My Little Pony. Just kidding, of course it's vampires. I bought these wonderful little 10mm vampires from Forest Dragon, who is not sponsoring this video. They make miniatures for War Master, an old school Games Workshop game that plays with 10mm models. There's a non-zero chance that if painting this model is in any way enjoyable, I might end up with a fully 3D printed Vampire Count army for War Master in about a month. I printed these minis on my frozen Sonic Mini 4K with some fancy resin recommended to me by a fellow painter, Joshua Lai. Shout out to Super Tank and Just Legos on the Atlas Support Discord server for helping me dial in my printer settings for this surprisingly finicky resin. This video would not have been possible without their expertise. Okay, enough foreplay. Let's paint this absolutely tiny vampire. The model came on a piece of terrain, so I tried to replicate the details found in the terrain on the rest of the base. I superglued sharp and jagged pieces of rock on an angle to my base and then sealed it all in with super glue thin. I was unable to get the other side of his sword guard to print after numerous attempts, so I decided to simply recreate it with styrene and attach it with some superglue. It's not perfect, but it means that I don't have to wait an hour and a half for the possibility that it prints correctly. Then I primed the model, and this is when I really got a chance to see the model in full glory. I am really blown away by how detailed you can get with a 4K resin 3D printer. I feel like it's pretty much as good as plastic models, but I'm not entirely sure yet. I primed this model with an airbrush to apply as thin a layer of paint as possible. Because this miniature is so tiny, a couple of poor choices could obscure some otherwise helpful detail. The first part of the model that I tackled was the armor, as it's the biggest element on the miniature and most central to the sculpt. That's not zoomed in enough. Enhance! Always wanted to say that. I started base coating with a very dark purple and then progressively mixed more and more red into it to get my highlights. My plan going into this was to paint each part of the model from a dark color and up. I was afraid that base coating the model and applying a wash and then several more layers would possibly cover up some detail with needless layers of paint. The most important thing to me is to preserve the dark lines in the recesses, because if I were to mess them up, it would be very challenging to re-add them back in. It's not impossible, but if I can avoid it, I'm going to. I highlighted up to pure saturated red. I'm using Chimera red in this instance. At the very end, I mixed in a little off-white yellow to create a pinkish highlight. I used this same color to do a bit of edge highlighting as well, where I could manage it. Lastly, I darkened down the sides of his torso and other select areas with a glaze of the same dark purple we started with. My plan was to make the armor appear as though it was a shiny metallic red. Soon thereafter, though, I abandoned that dream. The model is too small, and this particular detail is too broken up to make it a task I can accomplish in a reasonable amount of time. You certainly can, just look at the sculptor's painted versions of these minis. I wasn't interested in sacrificing my firstborn for these kinds of painting skills, however, but maybe next time. I moved on to the face and skin, and it was time to bust out some serious tools. Check out these chick Magnifiers. This is a magnifier that can attach to your head. There are other varieties as well that you can clip to your glasses, allowing you to flip them up when not needed, similar to the headband model. The lenses that come with these have a measurement of magnification or diopters. What I have found from the few that I have tested is that the higher the magnification, the shallower the depth of field. In this case, that means there's less leeway about where your head can be with respect to the model in order to maintain proper focus. Logistically, the headband makes filming complicated as it gets in the way of the camera. I found one of the clip options that worked pretty well for me, sharpening up all the details, but for some reason it messed with my eye-hand coordination just enough to make it not worth it. I'll try it out again on a miniature variety that I'm not painting for the first time ever. Just like the armor, I started with dark colors and worked my way up to brighter tones. For the entire paint job, I was using what is effectively a size 0 brush, one size smaller than I normally use. I would also press the brush against the side of my finger so that in one orientation, the brush was as sharp as a knife's edge, and I could sneak that thing into any nook or cranny I wanted. Any nook or cranny. Because this mini is so tiny, blending really isn't something that I'm concerned about. Miniature painters often paint their minis to look good at 5 feet. The notion here is that at some distance away, your capacity to blend doesn't matter because all the colors blur together in a pleasant way anyways. That same notion is true here, but like 10 times as much. Because this model is 1/3 the size of a mini that I normally deal with, the distance from which my blending efforts obscure into meaningless pedantry is also reduced by 1/3. Maybe it's more, maybe it's less. I'm not a mini painting scientist, ask Goobs. Could everyone please hold their breath while I attempt to paint this 10mm vampire's teeth? Okay, alright, thank you. Now once more while I paint its eyes, please. Now that I'm hyperventilating, let's take a small break to thank the sponsor of this video. MV Creative is a miniature company born from terrible kids stuff, a display miniature manufacturer that I've loved for a very long time. With this new business venture, they are designing wonderfully characteristic 32mm goblin models in their second Kickstarter campaign called Green Skull Castle, Heroes and Legends. Their first campaign was funded in 5 hours, which makes sense. Who doesn't love a good goblin sculpt? The models are 3D sculpted and casted in resin by industry leaders, and the detail is great. These models are heroic scale, so their proportions are a little exaggerated, which allows for an easier time painting the harder parts of the model like the face, making them enjoyable to paint no matter what your skill level is. The new designs for this Kickstarter include some Eastern influence in the aesthetic. Barbarians, tribesmen, and of course, witch hunters. Oh, you didn't know that witch hunting was a very common goblin profession? You can grab a single miniature, a group of 5, or the whole set of minis from this campaign. If you want to pledge Green Skull Castle, you can find it linked in the description below. Thank you to MV Creative for supporting YouTubers. Now back to my tiny vampire. Let's try some non-metallic metal gold. This is done in the same way as everything else. I start dark and build up my layers of highlights slowly. There's no chance I'll be able to make these bat details look like anything too convincingly metal, so I pick out small little parts to add bright spots of highlight, like the cheeks, the eyebrows, chins, etc. As for where I'm placing my lights and shadows on the guard of the sword, there's no real rhyme or reason. As long as there's a cool looking blend of colors, that's good enough for me. Lastly, I glaze a warm yellow ink across my midtones to warm the gold up so that it looks more like gold and less like brass. The bones are pretty simple, just a progression of browns and creams. On the larger horn on his shoulder, I tried to add a stripy bone texture on the final highlight. For the wolf pelt, I decided to try out a wash as the texture was quite deep, starting with a lilac purple and then washing with a blue. It worked out just fine with some highlights added after the fact, so maybe my approach to the earlier parts of the model were a little overly cautious. Lastly, let's do that sword blade. I slowly built up brighter and brighter layers of gray, focusing the highlight not at the halfway point, but 3/4 of the way up the length of the blade. This way, it doesn't look planned out or following some kind of pattern, but kind of random. I made sure to cover up about 90% of the previous layer with each progressively brighter layer, giving myself enough room to eventually end on a decently large, bright white highlight. The rest of the details on this model aren't terribly important, so let's do a little 10mm retrospective. Oh god, my inner corporate software engineer is coming out. I took about 5 hours to paint this model. Before you chastise me in the comment section for taking a long time on a tiny mini, let me explain. I was painting this model with a higher degree of effort. If I were to apply the same choices to a 32mm model, the process would have easily taken me over 25 hours. It kind of got me thinking, what would speed painting a model of this size look like? You could very reasonably finish a model in 10 to 20 minutes and it would look good. From a distance of 5/3 feet, of course. It's very easy for miniature painting to feel incredibly pedantic if you want to get really nice results. You are often going over the same area multiple times before it looks nice, and that's just one small part of the mini. With a 10mm model, you can get the satisfaction of painting a miniature in a crunchy way while spending significantly less time. You can effectively have your cake and eat it too. This has got me interested in looking at other 10mm stuff. I hope that you guys check out some stuff at this scale as well, especially if what I've been saying has been relatable. Maybe this scale is the answer to your mini painting prayers. Sorry if the video was shorter than expected, the model was admittedly smaller than normal and took me less time. Go figure. Ha, I hate myself. That's it for this one, guys. If you're watching this video soon after its release, I am live right now on Twitch painting some mustard yellow dark Eldar, and you should come hang out. The link to my stream is in the description below, and I think John is hanging out with me this Friday. If you're not watching this soon after its publication, I usually stream from 1 to 4 p.m. CST on Fridays. Lastly, I am running a Kickstarter campaign sometime in the future, and I have a mailing list where I send weekly updates on Mondays about the campaign. You can find a sign-up link in the description below. In the meantime, here's a little teaser. die. But most importantly, don't forget to paint my minis!